Hello and welcome everybody. Today we're going to be talking about the 10 most fun overclocks in Deep Rock Galactic. Now I've done a list like this before, but that was before we had Season 2 and before we had all the new overclocks for all those weapons as well as all the current changes from Season 2 and 3. So I'm going to go over the top 10 favorites that I have. If you have different favorites, awesome. There is a lot of really fun overclocks in Deep Rock, and this list was actually really difficult for me to make, just by narrowing it down to 10 of them. Our very first one comes from Gunner. This is from the Hurricane. This is Salvo Module. Salvo Module is a rocket shotgun. You can now load up your rockets and fire up to 9 of them so long as you hold down your trigger. This will line them up. You can release it at any point, so you don't need to hold this until you get 9. You can shoot just 2, 3, 4, 5, however many you would like. The more rockets you have lined up, the more damage your rockets will do. However, they can't be guided anymore, so you just have to fire up normally. That's not to say you don't have guided rockets anymore, though, because you still do if you tap fire the gun. So you can still fire out these one at a time, steer them around like you normally would, and fly them into whatever enemies that you see necessary. Usually this is the way that I build it, going for more rate of fire, armor breaking, more ammo, and stun, as well as more AoE damage because the rockets do scale with AoE. You could also pair this with the fire mod in tier 5 if you want to light things on fire. That works really well if you want to pair this with something like volatile bullets. At number 9, we have Fat Boy, the nukes for the grenade launcher. This one never gets old. You get to fire out, well, mini nukes from your grenade launcher. They do really high damage, at least to an area. They do probably one of the most damages per shot out of any of the weapons in the game. However, they do come with a significant downside. Well, a couple. One is that you could potentially blow yourself up or teammates up. That's not usually a good thing. And you don't get very many shots with this. You definitely want to go with ammo with this, because otherwise, if you don't, and you're just going for full damage, you're locked at just 2 to 3 grenades, I think. I think it's just 2 grenades. And they'll be very devastating grenades, but 2 of them is not usually going to last you very long. It might be better now since there's the nitro bug going on, so you can get way more resupplies, so it makes less ammo efficient builds kind of better, but I'm pretty sure that's going to be patched out very soon. Usually this is the way that I build my nuke grenade launcher. More ammo, faster speeds, more AoE, and then single target damage. You can run this with proxy trigger too and have a very fun overclock, but a very dangerous one to use then too, because you might blow yourself up or blow teammates up that much easier. At number 9, we have aggressive venting on Scout's Drac. This one is a clean overclock, but it is a very interesting clean overclock. This one makes it so when you overheat your gun, it doesn't overheat as long as it normally does, and it burns everything around you. This one also causes fear to all enemies around you, which is very useful. Enemies running away and on fire is great. I build it usually like this so that I can just stack up the rate of fire faster, so that I can overheat the gun quicker and burn everything quicker. It's just more DPS, as well as you get to move around faster. This is very fun. I find it super ammo efficient. You have tons of mobility. You synergize really well with some of your other stuff that Scout has, like your boomerangs now work really well with this, and your IFGs have always worked really well with this. Pheromones too, because you can cluster everything together and just run in and burn everything. One kind of downside to having aggressive venting, though, is if you're playing this in a group and you're not really paying attention to what your teammates are doing, it's very easy to accidentally run into their line of fire and potentially get downed because well, you're getting shot in the back by like a minigun or something. You could also potentially consider running the perk friendly with this, just so that doesn't happen as often. At number 7, we have the Mole. This is for Gunner's Coil Gun, and what the Mole does is give you more damage if you can punch through terrain and hit enemies. I really like this because it turns your already really fun coil gun into more of a fun mini game where you try to put as many surfaces between you and the enemy as possible. Usually this isn't necessary to put up like more than 2, because it becomes really difficult if you can't find more than just 2 things to shoot through. You can build yourself a whole Swiss cheese castle and fire through it and deal massive damage. You can one-shot things like dreadnoughts with that if you really want to, at least with the twins. The other 2 dreadnoughts have their own phases where they're invulnerable, but you still can one-shot a phase from them. So Mole gives you 150 extra damage for every single surface that you punch through. So if you punch through 2 surfaces, you're doing an extra 300 damage to enemies, and even if you're just punching through 1 surface, it's an extra 150, which is very useful. Downside is that you charge slower. That's not a huge downside, since sometimes the enemies are moving. You will want to ping enemies ahead of time so that you can actually punch through the ground to hit them, and this is very devastating against basically everything that you hit. Oh yeah, and this is usually the way that I build it. However, there's plenty of different ways you can build it. You can build it for all damage too. That's also very fun if you want to just stack as much damage as possible on there. but usually I just go for more of a utility build with it. At number 6, we have RJ250. This is the bouncy overclock for Engineer. This lets you bounce yourself or potentially stop fall damage or potentially down yourself by accident. And what this one does is once you jump into the air or any teammate jumps into the air and you fire this underneath yourself or them, this will send them flying opposite to where the grenade blew up at. You get a lot more ammo with this, but your grenade launcher does less damage. Less damage is not necessarily a bad thing because you can't hurt yourself as much with this as you normally would, and then you can also build this to have fire damage on it so you don't hurt yourself as much as you usually do. This is usually the build that I run with it. This build also works fairly well for clearing up grunt swarms and swarms. It really doesn't work that great if you have a mixed swarm though, but you get tons of utility from this and it's super fun to use. At number 5, we have magic bullets for the revolver. I love magic bullets. This is probably one of my favorite secondaries in the entire game. This is for the Bulldog Heavy revolver, and what magic bullets does is, well, it turns all of your bullets into magic. So whenever they hit a surface, whether that be an enemy or just the ground, walls, ceilings, whatever it might be, your bullets will then jump into a nearby enemy so long as there's an enemy within 5 meters of it. This also reduces your damage, but you get more ammo from it. It makes it very easy to just kind of snap towards any sort of enemy and just fire in their general direction, and you usually get some value out of this. The way that I like building magic bullets is like this. This is my favorite build for it. Faster reloads, extra ammo, explosive rounds, and chemical rounds, because those explosive rounds and chemical rounds stack very well together. They can explode multiple times because your bullets are bouncing. And you can spread a lot of poison to a lot of enemies. It makes the revolver really, really good at crowd control and still decent at dealing with single targets. It pairs really well if you want to take it with a heavy damaging primary weapon like Bloodstorm Minigun or Big Bertha or Jet Fuel Homebrew. At number 4, we have another gunner weapon. This is Bullet Hell Minigun. This one is super fun. This one reduces your overall damage by a significant amount. You actually lose out on 3 damage, which is a lot for the minigun. But your bullets become bouncy bullets, so every bullet has a 75% chance of bouncing into a nearby enemy. You also have vastly increased spread, 6 times spread actually, so you're going to want to make up for that because otherwise this gets kind of crazy to where you can't hit things unless they're pretty much right in front of the barrel of your gun. So this is actually really useful if you want to check for leeches in a particular room. It can also just be useful for checking for potential threats in a room by just spraying this across and seeing how many health bars that you see. You can do the same thing with magic bullets too if you would like, and I actually like pairing both of these in combination. It's not really the best build, but it is a super fun build to be running. The way that I usually run it is like this: extra accuracy, more damage. The reason why I go with more damage is because then it only takes 2 bullets to kill a swarmer. If you don't have this, then it will take 3 bullets. And that's kind of annoying, at least on Hazard 4 and 5. If you're playing below that, then you could go with more ammo if you want. Blow-through rounds, because they can be useful. Stun is also pretty useful, though, in Tier 3. Faster spin up in Tier 4, and then fire bullets in Tier 5, because at least then we can stack a little bit more damage on the enemies that we're hitting. Major downside to this particular overclock, you're probably going to run through bullets with it really fast. Major upside, though, to this update is that Nitro is still bugged, and you can get a lot of it, at least as of making this video. I'm sure that's going to get patched out in like 2 weeks or so, but in the meantime, enjoy all the resupplies, and Bullet Hell is actually super fun when you have basically unlimited ammo. Alright, coming in at number 3, we have an Engineer Secondary. This is Plastrete Catalyst, which is still misspelled for some reason in the actual game. I'm not sure why it is, but it is. This one is the overclock that lets you fire your laser from the shard diffractor into one of your platforms, and then your platforms explode, dealing a massive amount of damage to everything around it. This can include yourself. Be very careful because the AoE radius is surprisingly large, and it's very easy to down yourself with this one. It's also very easy to down teammates with this too. And kind of a side note, just like the nukes, you can actually mine with this one too. It's not as effective as nuke mining, but it is something if you end up seeing materials in hard to reach places and you don't have a scout that can easily get them. The way that I build it is usually like this, going with extra ammo, AoE, faster charge, fire, and slowdowns, but basically anything works with this. I would recommend taking extra ammo because a lot of your damage is coming from the explosion, so the other tier ones I don't find as useful, but the rest are pretty interchangeable as to whatever you see fit that you want to use. At number 2, we have Bodkin points for the crossbow. This one is bouncy rounds for the crossbow. If you can't tell already, I really like bouncy rounds in this game. They are super fun and very visually interesting to watch. Bodkin points reduces your overall damage as well as reduces your reload speed, but every one of your bolts, when it hits an enemy, can bounce to 2 other enemies. This has gotten better with some updates because originally when this came out, it was more finicky than it is now. Sometimes your bolts just didn't seem to bounce to an enemy. Other times they would take more of a direct path to an enemy, which might be covered by a wall or basically anything that would stop the bolt normally. Now it seems like it tries to focus enemies that are outside of cover, although I have seen it bounce into walls still, so it's not perfect, but I feel like the updated AI or tracking or whatever it might be is a little bit better for your bolts actually going into multiple enemies and you getting extra value. You can build this to where you can still one-shot grunts at any difficulty, whether that be up to Hazard 5, well, Hazard 4 or 5, they have the same health regardless, if you take the extra damage in Tier 2. Usually the way I build it is like this, although Tier 1 and 5 are completely your choices depending on which bolts you want to use. Usually I run pheromones with these, but explosive bolts or lightning bolts can also be useful, and you could also take any of the Tier 5s that you find useful as well. This actually makes for surprisingly good crowd control, and I think it pairs really well if you want to take it with a high damage primary weapon that's more focused on single target damage. Moving on to my number 1 pick, we have Special Powder for the Boomstick. Special Powder for the Boomstick is just a very, very fun overclock. It actually doesn't really give you that much in terms of advantage. Sometimes it gives you almost nothing depending on the cave system that you're in, and it doesn't change the stats of the Boomstick whatsoever. The stats are exactly the same. It's just now that if you jump off the ground and fire this in the air, you will be launched in whichever the opposite direction is that you fired your shotgun. So you can aim it at your feet, jump straight up into the air, and this will let you get to very hard to reach places high up in the air. You can also use this to potentially stop fall damage, although it is a little bit tricky to get used to. It's more based on your momentum, so you might have to be shooting this a little bit sooner. It's also useful for just getting out of bad situations. You can use this as an escape to bounce yourself away. There is a major downside to having Special Powder though, and that is that it's far easier to break your legs when you're bouncing all the way around the place, because if you accidentally fire this at the wrong angle and end up hitting the ground, you're probably going to hit it with more velocity than you would otherwise, which the faster you're moving, the more fall damage you're going to take. So sometimes it might seem that you didn't even get that high up off the ground, but you will end up downing yourself or massively hurting yourself. But if you're willing to take those chances, Special Powder can be a very, very fun overclock. The way that I like running it is like this, going with full ammo. I do go with the reload speed, although the rate of fire is also pretty fun in Tier 2. It's just I forget to reload this thing sometimes, and I'm not always running Born Ready, so reload speed's a little bit more useful for me if I forget to reload this mid-air. Blow-through rounds and white phosphorus rounds are just very useful too if you want to be using this as a weapon, which, I mean, you can. There's no downsides to using this as the weapon. It's still just the basic boomstick. So these are my 10 favorite overclocks in Deep Rock. There is a lot of really, really fun overclocks. Please tell me yours down below. And thank you guys so very much for watching this. Special thanks to the supporters of this channel. These are my members over here on YouTube, patrons over on Patreon. They get early access to videos just like this. And if you'd like to be a part of it, you can. There is links in the description. Thanks. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I will talk to you next time. Bye-bye.